I didn't think my love for 2.3 could get replaced so quickly, but 2.7 has proven against that. Which is great because the last time I felt so heavily about an Archon quest, I ripped it apart in a rant. To sum this video up, I really like the 2.7 Archon quest. I do just have one problem with it though. If you're going to play it and other stories like it, I heavily suggest you wait until all the parts are out. The best way to immerse yourself in the story was without the real-life breaks in between, because it can cut off from the storytelling's continuity. But that's just a small drop in the ocean of 2.7's amazing story. 2.7's Archon quest really hit a new high when it comes to new cutscenes, cinematography, story pacing, domain building, and lore potential. Definitely gonna be a fan favorite for a long while. So today, I'm just gonna gloss over why I think this Archon quest is the best. I won't be going over all the details lore-wise, given that I still need time to study them, but this is just going to be a lighthearted video before we break it up apart for the lore. First is that the story pacing respected the Chekhov's gun principle. The Chekhov's gun is a dramatic principle that suggests the details within a story or play will contribute to the overall narrative, according to Masterclass. If we ignore the time-gated aspect of it being an event quest, this Archon quest's pacing was really well done. It had 3 parts to work with and was able to establish its key motifs. The overall details like the Electro Yaksha hinted by Xiao in the beginning when we first met him, Yanfei talking about the mysterious fantastic compass found in the will, to Yelan talking about her role of finding out what happened to her ancestors, establish the goals that the story needs to address at the end if it wants a good payoff. And it does! There are no details that are unaddressed at the end of the story. At least in the context of the Archon quest itself and not the overall world building of Genshin, since they do want to keep building mystery for Genshin's world. The Electro Yaksha's fate and even the other Yakshas were finally expanded on in the final cutscene. The story all the way back from 1.3 is even further recontextualized. And if you're a lore player that follows the Vermilion and the tenacity of the Millith all the way back from 1.5, you get that satisfying conclusion to find out who the nameless Yaksha is and what happened to the Chasm 500 years ago. We also get the lore of the fantastic compass and the ancestor both Yelan and Yanfei mentioned. And what's nice is that unlike the other NPCs that we had to learn through the backstories of, for example Leonard in 1.1, we instead experience what they had to go through and further empathize with the NPCs that were trapped here. We constantly get hints that the party is fatigued or slowly losing themselves. The comment from Paimon that they were there for 20 days versus the travelers one day gets insinuated when you read the letters at the end. As for the overarching themes that were constant in the Archon quest, we have the repetition of illusions, fear, and suffocation. The longer the team stays in the chasm, the more they start feeling fatigue and mental exhaustion. Illusions were established in the first part, but also that the illusions were being used to re-establish fear and coerce the party to stay deeper in the chasm, something that was re-established in the final cutscene with Boyang and Bosacius. The theme of illusions to illustrate your inner thoughts repeated constantly in the 3 parts, but they did it in a way that didn't use the same elements. In the first part, it was through Xiao's illusion to coerce the party to stay, and the immediate panic that the party felt when they heard Xiao's agony through the portal. The second was through the mysterious door which showed their inner fears, or at least something that they were just mildly disturbed by. And the third part was a full domain that allowed them to engage with their memories. The callback is really nice. Another detail that did technically pay off was Xiao's oath to self-sacrifice, hinted at the beginning when we met Xiao and then fully executed at the end of the Archon quest, had it not been for Zhongli saving him, of course. It's those small details that really make a story coherent and make you feel that somewhat sense of appropriate dread or achievement when these plot points get readdressed. Now, the story's pacing itself is something subjective, and it's something that I tore 2.1 apart for. In 2.1's Archon quest, I argue that too many plot points were teased and established without coherent payoffs or proper readdressing. As a contrast, I think this Archon quest paced itself as it should. No time was wasted in their attempt to look for Xiao, and no time was wasted trying to look for the fantastic compass. No unnecessary side quests, no NPC to ask for help, no prolonged banter that led to another plot point, just a consistent story that did what it needed to do. Atmosphere building. Now, the general atmosphere of the Archon quest is actually pretty comedic. Ito and Cookie's presence help ease the tension in the beginning parts simply because Ito was needed for comic relief. My guess is that Hoyo didn't really want to commit to the overall dark atmosphere for the whole thing and wanted to save it at the end so it hit the hardest and was least expected. Which is why it was important that Cookie and Ito were temporarily absent from the last part of the story because the atmosphere needed to refocus onto Xiao. The dialogue throughout the last part was pretty heavy, and all the characters on the scene knew the urgency of the situation. There was no witty dialogue or playful banter during that part. But overall, what What I think this Archon quest does greatly is building that sense of urgency and that false sense of security that we felt in the beginning. In the first part of the story quest, characters are immediately fighting or bickering with each other for getting themselves trapped, and then the story builds on that mystery. The players and the characters know that staying in this place is dangerous and that getting out is a top priority, but we never get a reason why. Ito's fun antics are a good distraction from that impending doom, and with Kuki somehow having supplies to last him for a while, we get that feeling that everything's gonna be alright. They also say that they don't feel tired or anything, so there's no need for food or rest. When we see Xiao though, we get an innate timer in the story. But nevertheless, the second part of the quest is still lighthearted. Ito livens up the atmosphere. We get the mysterious door and we get some inner thoughts from the characters, and the quote-unquote fears of the characters aren't really anything big. Then we get to the Traveler's Sphere, and suddenly the wait continues when we reach the Abyss. It's when Xiao is introduced to the story that the atmosphere darkens. The conversation with Yanfei saying that this space might be trying to lure us in whiplashes us with the realization about the first part, and that sudden feeling something is watching you constantly eats away at the player. Xiao's speech about self-sacrifice and Yelan's quick rebuttal slowly kill morale, and when Ito is incapacitated with Kuki and Ushi staying behind, we know we've reached the part of no return for the story. The atmosphere shifts and it finally kicks in that, oh shit, we're stuck down here and we might die. The way Paimon screams is heartbreaking, saying that she doesn't want to die and that she wants to stay with the Traveler. This atmosphere cultivates until the big climax. The reason it was so impactful was because the feeling of dread was constantly hovering over us. There would always be that safety net of emotion, but we didn't have that here. We didn't have that feeling of, it's going to be alright. When the situation gets dire and we see Xiao's resolve to sacrifice himself, at the back of our mind, we assume that he was going to die, and Xiao himself thinks that he's dead. Until literal Deus Ex Machina saves him in the form of Zhongli. But regardless, that's why the payoff for these moments are so good. Why this Archon quest feels the way it does instead of just being told that we are feeling something in the story. Adding lore as an element to gameplay. This one is pretty minute, but I really like that they talked about the lore in the gameplay. Genshin lore players that have dissected the story from the artifacts see this as a loss, but I think there is a big difference between lore and established narrative. Not everyone has the time for artifacts, so telling the story to the player is so important. So when I say established narrative, it's the practical use of the lore and how the lore integrates into the present moment. It's important to talk about the lore and build on it, instead of just letting it bury away in the background. I'm looking at you, La Senora Crimson Witch of Embers. The lack of faceless NPCs. The lack of faceless NPCs made this story great. The NPCs weren't the focus and no one intervened. Bongyang didn't feel like he was imposing in the plot and instead enhanced the story of the Purple Yaksha. The NPCs were just background characters, as they should be. Genshin has that habit of adding NPCs when they don't have to, or at least taking the spotlight away from the cooler looking characters to talk about some guy. I'm happy this one doesn't. Innovative domain building. The domain was amazing. We've never seen anything like it and I'm so happy. The new light mechanics are fun and the overall aesthetic of this domain feel really fresh. Instead of the usual floating island Serenity pot motif of the Liyue domains, we get a more foreboding domain that looks a lot like Celestia's rocks. The design and the overall what the hell is happening topsy-turvy is amazing and I really wish that they would make more domains as cool as this. Raising the stakes of the story. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Death is important in a story, especially if it's a character that we have grown attached to. Death is an important narrative tool to make the reader feel tension, and I think Genshin's done a great job of executing that ideology into this. No one died in this story, yes, but we were close to getting our first playable character death in the last part. We are still very new to the story given Inazuma is chapter 2, so there's no way Xiao would die this early in the game. But this story didn't have the overarching thought of, they can't kill characters in an event quest, because this story is permanent content. Xiao's sacrifice at the end, therefore, felt very real and very, very scary. Character studies. Because of the lack of NPCs, we got to learn more about the characters, which I think is really nice. We learned about Kuki, Ito, Yanfei, and Xiao through the stories, but another character that was executed well was Yelan. Yelan's whole character was told to us by not saying anything at all. We were just told her ideologies, and that's it. Really adds to her mystery. The chasm itself. The Chasm itself has got to be one of the best locations lore-wise in all of Genshin. Dragonspine is hinted to be alive, but we never really got to feel it. But for this one, you really feel the Chasm being this malevolent entity, and you finally understand why Celestia decided to steal this place, or why the Chasing had to put the 7-star seal on it. The Chasm doesn't feel like a place, it feels like a creature, with how Yanfei refers to this mysterious entity as it or something, and how the letters hint that there was something alive with them. The whole place feels like it's breathing. That's what makes it even scarier. Other details. I really like that when Paimon sleeps and hovers, if you go to the menu, she doesn't show up. And the little blurring effect to manifest perspective makes the cutscenes have a little more depth. The general dialogue between all of them felt great, and the characters feel like characters. Aether didn't really get to do a whole lot for this one, but honestly, with how exhausted he must have been dealing with Paimon and Itto, I don't think he had anything else to do. Overall, I think 2.7's Archon quest has got to be the best one so far. Really pushed the storytelling potential of Genshin. Hoyo really outdone themselves on this one, and I'm glad to see this in the future updates. Anyway, my name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me.